What if the only person who could save her was the one man the whole town wanted her to fear? The red dust of Redemption Flats rose like a living thing that day. It drifted over the single street, settling on windows, coat sleeves, and the weary faces of people who had learned to survive more on grit than on hope. The sun hung overhead like a blacksmith's hammer, beating down with relentless heat. Every clang from the smithy echoed through the dusty air, steady and sharp, the closest thing this rough town had to a heartbeat. Abigail Carter walked through it all, with her small list of supplies clutched in one hand. A year of widowhood had changed her into a woman who moved with quiet purpose. Her chin lifted just enough to ward off gossip, her steps steady, her eyes forward. The townsfolk watched her from porches and windows. She felt their gazes like pinpricks on her back. In Redemption Flats, a woman alone was either pitied or judged. Most days, she was both. But today, fate had other plans. Inside Coleman's Mercantile, the warm smell of coffee beans and leather mixed with dust. Abigail stood at the counter, waiting for Mr. Coleman to weigh out flour. That was when the batwing doors of the saloon crashed open across the street, and Jake Thornton swaggered into the sunlight. Jake was the kind of man who mistook cruelty for charm. He crossed the street with a smirk on his face and whiskey on his breath. When he stepped into the Mercantile, the room went silent. "Well now," Jake drawled, eyes locking onto Abigail. "Look at the pretty little widow. Must get awful lonely out in that cabin, huh?" Abigail didn't look at him. "A sack of flour, please, Mr. Coleman, and 2 pounds of beans." Jake stepped closer. The smell of stale beer rolled off him. "A woman like you shouldn't be alone. Needs a man to look after her." Mr. Coleman's hand shook as he set the flour down. Prudence Whitfield, at the far end of the aisle, sucked in a dramatic breath and stepped away as if Abigail carried a plague. Before Jake could speak again, the door opened. Samuel McGrath stepped inside, the owner of the Triple M Ranch. A man carved from long days and longer losses. He wasn't tall, but something in his steady gaze made men straighten and think twice. His hat and shoulders were dusted red from the road, his jaw set, his eyes unreadable. Beside him stood his foreman, Josiah Winters. Samuel didn't raise his voice. "Thornton." Jake froze like a kicked dog. Samuel stepped closer, placing himself between Abigail and trouble. "Your conversation is over." Jake sneered. "Just being friendly." "You don't know the meaning of the word," Samuel replied, his voice calm but sharp as barbed wire. The tension snapped. Jake backed away, muttering ugly things under his breath as he left. The store exhaled. Samuel turned to Abigail. "Mrs. Carter, I was coming to see you. I hear you might be looking for a change." She finally looked at him. In his eyes she saw no pity, no judgment, only a quiet certainty that steadied something inside her. "I might be," she said. "I need a cook," Samuel said. "Room and board, fair pay, and respect, always." Jake's voice drifted faintly from outside. The timing of the offer told her everything she needed to know. Redemption Flats would never stop watching her, whispering about her, blaming her for things she never did. Her hands tightened around her list. "I'll take the job." 2 days later, her few belongings were loaded into Samuel's wagon. Dust swirled around them as they sat beneath the shade of a lone cottonwood on the Triple M land, finalizing the terms. Abigail was nervous, but steady. She had rehearsed one more request. "One last thing," she said. "I want permission to enter the horse corrals, if needed." Samuel blinked. "The corrals?" "Sometimes a horse just needs a different hand." Her quiet tone hid the truth. She had a gift for reading fear and trust in animals, a gift she had guarded her whole life. He studied her closely, then nodded. "All right, Mrs. Carter, as long as you're careful." That night, Abigail worked late in the kitchen, scrubbing away months of grime and reclaiming the space as her own. She had barely finished when she heard shouting from the horse pen outside. A terrified neigh split the night. She stepped out to see a young Mustang thrashing in a cloud of dust, fighting the rope held by Daniel, the ranch's horse wrangler. Men stood around the pen, tense and helpless. The horse reared, wild fear in every muscle. Without thinking, Abigail slipped through the rails. "Mrs. Carter," Josiah shouted. Get out of there! Samuel took a step forward, alarm flashing in his eyes. But Abigail didn't stop. She walked with slow, measured steps. No challenge in her posture. No fear. Her hands were low and open. Her gaze fixed not on the horse's eyes, but on its trembling legs. She murmured softly, steady, calm sounds more than words. The Mustang froze. Its sides heaved. Its muscles quivered. Daniel slackened the rope. Stunned, the horse watched Abigail with wide, wild eyes. But she kept her voice soothing, a soft hum that seemed to settle over the whole pen. She extended a hand toward its shoulder. Not its face. Never the face. A moment stretched thin. Then the horse lowered its head and exhaled a long, trembling breath. Abigail's gentle hand brushed its neck. A hush fell. Daniel stepped forward, awe in his voice. "Ma'am, I ain't never seen anything like that." He hesitated. "My name's Daniel Thornton." Abigail stiffened. The last name landed in the dust between them like a thrown stone. Jake Thornton's brother. But Daniel's eyes held nothing cruel, only sadness. "We ain't alike," he said quietly. Samuel watched the scene from the fence, his expression complicated. He had hired a cook, not a horse whisperer, not a miracle worker. But as he looked at her in that pen, dust swirling around her skirts, horse calm beneath her hand, he felt something shift inside him. Fear, admiration, and a spark of something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Later, from her small window, Abigail looked out at the quiet ranch under a sky full of stars. She felt something stir in her chest, a fragile, hesitant beginning. She didn't know what waited for her on this land, but for the first time since she buried her husband, she felt like she had stepped toward something that was hers. And maybe, just maybe, someone who saw her worth. The peace that settled over the Triple M was thin and fragile, like a layer of frost that could crack under the wrong step. Abigail felt it every morning when she lit the stove before dawn. The kitchen had become her world, warm and steady, filled with the smell of coffee and rising bread. The men respected her. They scraped their boots before stepping inside. They said thank you. They left her space. But the world outside the ranch was changing. The drought tightened around the valley like a noose. Cooper's Creek, the lifeblood of the Triple M, sank lower each day. The grass turned brittle. The cattle grew restless. And men spoke in low voices about Clayton Morrison, whose hunger for land and water had never faded. Abigail tried to focus on her work, but tension hummed beneath the surface like a wire pulled tight. Then, disaster struck. It happened in the corral when young Tommy Rodriguez was thrown from a frightened horse. His scream rang across the ranch. Men rushed toward him, shouting, panic rising like a storm. Abigail got there first, kneeling beside him, her apron still dusted with flour. Tommy's leg was twisted at a terrible angle. Blood poured from a deep gash on his arm. "Bring my sewing basket," Abigail said sharply, "and boil clean water. Now!" Her voice cut through the fear like a blade. The men obeyed without question. She cleaned the wound, poured whiskey over it, and stitched the gash with calm, steady hands. Then she helped Josiah and Samuel pull the leg straight, while Tommy cried into his sleeve. When they were done, Tommy lay pale but breathing. The men stared at Abigail with something close to awe. She wiped her hands clean and told them how to keep his fever down. That night, the ranch felt different. She wasn't just the cook. She was the one they trusted. But trouble was walking toward them all the same. 2 days later, Clayton Morrison rode into the yard. He sat tall in the saddle, looking down at Samuel with the cold eyes of a man who believed everything in the world could be bought. "I'm making you another offer," Morrison said, his voice smooth. "For the water rights, enough to clear your debts." "The answer is no," Samuel replied. "This drought won't spare you," Morrison said. "And neither will the bank." His eyes slid toward the cookhouse. "And neither will the town. Folks are talking." Samuel's jaw tensed. "Leave," he said. Morrison left, but his shadow stayed. That same evening, Red rode back from town carrying mail and a strained look on his face. Abigail met him on the porch of the cookhouse. "Mrs. Carter," Red said quietly, holding his hat in both hands. People been saying things, ugly things. Prudence Whitfield's stirring folks up. Abigail's heart dropped. What kind of things? The kind meant to hurt, Red replied. But none of us here believe it. She nodded, but her hands trembled as she kneaded dough later that night. She had run from judgment once. It had found her again. The next morning, she needed supplies from town. Red offered to drive her in the wagon. Redemption Flats felt colder than usual despite the heat. People she'd known for months avoided her eyes. Inside the mercantile, Prudence Whitfield's voice rose sharp and cruel. Some people have no shame, she announced loudly. A woman living alone with 20 men. It's indecent. Abigail stared hard at her list, refusing to look up. Then Jake Thornton walked in. He smelled of whiskey and swagger. He blocked her path, smiling like a man who enjoyed causing pain. Still playing housemaid for McGrath's men? He sneered. Red stepped between them, his young voice shaking with anger. You leave her alone! Jake shoved him. Or what? Before the situation could explode, Sheriff Daniels entered. He looked tired, too tired for this kind of trouble. What's going on here? Jake backed off with a fake smile. Nothing, Sheriff, just talking. But outside, Abigail saw something that froze her blood. A crude flyer nailed to the notice board, ink smeared but words clear. A woman of loose morals lives among us. She must be removed. Abigail stared at it. Each word cut deeper than any knife. When she returned to the ranch, the men fell silent as the flyer passed from hand to hand. Their anger simmered hot and dangerous. But Abigail slipped away to her room. She pressed her hands to her eyes, her breath shaking. She had come here for peace. Now she was the spark for trouble. Hours later, near dawn, she packed her small carpet bag. She could not stay. She would not ruin Samuel's life or the ranch's safety. She tied her bonnet strings with trembling fingers. A soft knock sounded on the door. She opened it. Samuel stood there, lantern in hand, his shirt half-buttoned, his hair still mussed from sleep, his eyes full of something that pulled her breath away. He looked at the bag on the floor. He didn't need to ask. Don't, he said quietly. I have to, she whispered. They hate me, and Morrison will use me against you. You're not the reason, Samuel said gently. You're the excuse. Morrison wants my water. Prudence wants someone to judge. Thornton wants someone to hurt. They'd find another target even if you never set foot here. She shook her head. If I leave, maybe the trouble will stop. If you run, Samuel said, stepping closer, they win, and we lose everything that matters. Her breath caught. What can we do? He looked straight into her eyes. There's a town meeting on Friday. They'll talk about the school teacher, but everyone knows it's about us. We're going. Together. No guns. Just truth. Her voice trembled. You'd stand with me. In front of them all? His answer was simple. And without you, I won't stand at all. Her bonnet strings slowly loosened in her hands. By the time Friday arrived, the whole valley felt tight with waiting. Samuel and Abigail rode into town in the buckboard with the Triple M men behind them. No guns. Only loyalty. The church was crowded, hot, and heavy with judgment. Prudence Whitfield rose first. An unmarried woman living with men, she said sharply. It is indecent. Clayton Morrison stood next. Mr. McGrath has allowed chaos to spill into our town. For the good of Redemption Flats, this must end. The room buzzed with tension. Samuel squeezed Abigail's hand, then she rose. Thunder rolled outside as Abigail faced the people who had condemned her. My name is Abigail Carter, she said softly. I am a widow who works for her living. I cook, I mend, I care for the sick. I ask for nothing but dignity. If that is indecent, then I stand guilty. Raindrops struck the roof. Lightning flashed. The room shifted, people watching her with new eyes. But Morrison wasn't done. He stepped forward. She speaks of dignity, yet she lives among 20 men. A deafening crack of thunder shook the room. The church doors slammed open. Tommy Rodriguez stood there, soaked and gasping. The broken wheel, he cried. Lightning hit the hay barn. It's burning. It's going up fast. Everything froze. Then Samuel shouted, We ride! He ran for the door. Abigail followed without hesitation. The Triple M men mounted up. Half the town followed. Clayton Morrison stood stunned as his sworn enemy led the charge to save his ranch. And Abigail rode beside Samuel, soaked, scared, but burning with bravery. Tonight, the fire would decide everything. The storm lit the sky in violent flashes as Samuel and Abigail rode at the head of the rushing line of men. Rain hammered the earth, washing the red dust into streaks of mud. The orange glow of the fire rose ahead of them like a warning from the heavens. The broken wheel hay barn, Morrison's largest, was half swallowed by flames that roared higher with every crack of lightning. Men from Redemption Flats and the Triple M jumped off their horses before they stopped running. No one cared about grudges now. Fire didn't ask who was friend or enemy. Samuel shouted orders while holding his injured shoulder tight to his side. Josiah led the men into a line to haul buckets from the swollen creek. Abigail ran straight toward the frantic horses trapped in the adjacent stable. Smoke poured from its open doorway. "Abigail!" Samuel yelled, his voice breaking through the rain. "Stay back!" She didn't stop. Inside the stable, terrified horses screamed and kicked at their stalls. Abigail grabbed a rope from the wall and moved fast, her voice steady and soft as she approached each animal. "Easy, easy now. I'm getting you out." One by one, she freed them. Daniel Thornton rushed to her side, helping push the last mare into the stormy night. The heat from the barn grew unbearable. When Abigail stumbled coughing into the rain, Samuel caught her, pulling her to his chest with a mixture of fear and relief. By the time dawn broke, the big hay barn was gone, nothing more than a black skeleton, but the main house and the stables stood. The fire was out, the valley was saved, and the town had witnessed everything. Abigail risking her life, Samuel fighting through pain, the Triple M working like a single loyal army. Clayton Morrison stood in the rubble of his barn, looking at Samuel with a mix of shame and disbelief. His voice was thin when he finally said, "Thank you." But the relief was short-lived. 2 weeks later, when life finally seemed calm again, the banker from Pueblo arrived with a neatly pressed suit and a cold expression. Morrison had made a private deal. He bought Samuel's debt, and he wanted the money in 30 days. The Triple M was being strangled from behind a desk, not at gunpoint. That night, the ranch kitchen was heavy with despair. Samuel, Josiah, Red, and Abigail sat around the table as the clock ticked. They counted everything they owned. It wasn't enough. Then Josiah remembered an old story, an abandoned Spanish silver mine deep in the canyon on Triple M land. Hope flickered. Desperate hope. They dug into the earth with their bare hands, lanterns, and a few sticks of blasting powder. Abigail waited each night, patching scraped knuckles and bandaging cut skin, her prayers quiet but fierce. Days passed. Then, weeks. Hope thinned. Until Josiah struck a dark, heavy vein running through a narrow wall. Samuel held a lantern close and saw the truth glimmer back at him. Silver. Real silver. They worked around the clock, hauling out canvas bags of ore. On the 29th day, Samuel and Red loaded the heaviest bags into the wagon and raced for Pueblo. Abigail watched them go with her hands clasped tight against her heart. They made the sale. It was enough. The silver saved the ranch. But the danger wasn't over. On the ride back, in a narrow canyon, gunfire cracked the quiet morning. Jake Thornton and another hired man ambushed them, trying to steal the money. A bullet tore through Samuel's shoulder. But Josiah, who had taken a longer route, appeared at the canyon mouth and returned fire, breaking the ambush. Samuel stayed conscious long enough to insist Josiah take the money and ride ahead. "Don't wait for me," he said through gritted teeth. "Save the ranch." Josiah obeyed. Back at the Triple M, the banker waited, watch in hand. The deadline ticked closer. Abigail's heart hammered in her chest as minutes slipped away. When Josiah arrived alone, dirty and shaking, she didn't wait to hear more. She grabbed her medical bag and mounted up with Billy and Daniel. They found Samuel, barely holding on, slumped in the saddle, Red guiding his horse. Abigail jumped from her horse before it stopped and ran to him. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, her hands steady, though tears streamed down her face. On the slow, painful wagon ride home, Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness. Abigail knelt beside him, bracing his body with her own to keep him stable. Rain-soaked wind blew through the wagon, cold and sharp. When she thought he might fade away for good, she whispered the truth she had held inside her heart. "You're my first," she cried softly, trembling with fear. "Since Thomas died, you're the first man who ever made me feel seen, wanted, chosen." Samuel's eyes opened, weak but clear, and he touched her hand with his good one. "And your last," he whispered. "I choose you, Abigail, forever." She broke into tears, holding his hand like a lifeline. But just when they thought the worst had passed, lantern light flared at the Triple M gate. Morrison sat on horseback with a circle of armed men behind him. The banker stood at his side. "You're late," Morrison said coldly. "The ranch is mine." Samuel forced himself upright with Abigail's help. "The money is here," he said through clenched teeth, "and you sent men to ambush us." "Prove it," Morrison sneered. Samuel looked at the banker. Not a cruel man, only a man who wanted order, so Samuel did what no one expected. "This isn't about papers anymore," Samuel said loudly. "I challenge you, Morrison. No guns, just you and me, man to man. If I win, the banker takes our payment. If you win, the ranch is yours." The yard fell silent. Morrison accepted. The fight was brutal. Morrison stronger, Samuel wounded. Abigail watched, her heart in her throat, her hands balled in fists against her chest. Samuel staggered, fell, got up again. Then Morrison swung too wide. Samuel drove his good shoulder into Morrison's ribs, hooked his leg, and brought him to the ground. He pinned him, breathing hard. "It's over," Samuel said. "I yield," Morrison spat. Josiah handed the banker the money pouch. The banker nodded. "Debt paid." A roar of relief erupted. Morrison rode away, defeated. The Triple M was theirs. What came after felt like sunlight after a long winter. The town apologized to Abigail. Women came with pies, quilts, and warm words. The ranch thrived again as cattle prices rose. And one crisp evening, Samuel stood with Abigail on the porch. That's when he asked her to marry him. She said yes, smiling through tears. Their wedding was small but full of love. They were surrounded by the Triple M men, the town friends who had stood by them, and the graves of Margaret and Sarah, whom Samuel honored with quiet words. A year later, their son, Thomas, was born. The ranch hands crowded the doorway of the bunkhouse to see the tiny boy, their rough hands suddenly gentle. Abigail's eyes shone with pride. Samuel looked at his family, his ranch, his life rebuilt from ashes. The wind blew softly through the cottonwoods, making the silver wind chime ring with a soft, clear tone. Abigail leaned against him. "You saved us," she whispered. Samuel kissed her forehead. "We saved each other." Their love had been forged in dust, fire, and danger, but it held strong, steady as the mountains. Their forever had finally begun.